Everyone, this is Jerry inspired, very special guest, Professor Dave Karpf. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me.
So, first of all, we're both Penn alum, so I have to shout that out. But second of all, you've done some very interesting things, and I just wanted to go through some of that. So, are you okay with starting from the beginning? Let's talk about high school. What did you want to do in high school?
Okay. Yeah, so I grew up in around Rockville, Maryland, DC suburbs. When I was in high school, sophomore year, I became the head of my environmental club. And that kind of linked in for me. Something hooked in for that. That was right after Newt Gingrich had become Speaker of the House and was trying to sort of gut all of environmental laws. And the Sierra Club, which is the oldest and largest environmental group in the country, has a student run-on called the Sierra Student Coalition. So when I was in high school, I got involved with that, turned my high school environmental club into a county-wide group with students from, I think over a dozen high schools around my county. And instead of just like picking up trash by the side of the road, we started like trying to protect forests in Maryland and trying to stop a highway from getting built. So that was sort of my introduction to politics and political communication, was environmental activism. And starting in high school, that sort of just the timing and the motivation all lined up. So I was, like back when I was like, I kind of peaked when I was 20. Like when I was 20 years old, took a year off from college to be national director of the Sierra Student Coalition. And a lot of my instincts about how politics works were formed out of those years when I was learning how to go out and do organizing.
Wow. What made you decide just to take 1 year off versus like, let's take 5 years off, or let's take 10 years off?
I toyed for a minute with not going back to college and just working in the environmental movement.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on the fence. Part of it was like, my parents couldn't stop me, but like, I love my parents. I get along very well with them. And they were like, please finish college. It's better to finish college. So I kind of easily got talked out of that. So I went back and finished college, which was overall the right choice. Stay in school, kids, for anyone listening. But yeah, so I was still doing that work as a volunteer leader. And then after I graduated college, I moved back to the DC area. The plan was to work for Sierra Club, and just sort of like, if you had asked me when I was 23 years old, like, what are you going to do with your life? I would have told you I'm going to be a nonprofit leader. I want to, work in Sierra Club and movement organizations for forever. And then that year after I moved back there, the job that I had moved to DC for dissolved. So there was a rough few months where I was kind of figuring out, okay, well, so what am I going to do now? And I realized that I was still buying political science books to read for fun while I figured out what to do with my life. And if you get into a good doctoral program, they will pay you a measly stipend to read books and think about stuff. So putting those two together, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life, but maybe I'll apply to grad school, apply to a PhD program. I don't know if I'll actually become a professor or anything. Like, I still think I want to, be a movement agent. But if they'll pay me to read the books I want to read, then that's a decent way to spend my mid-20s. So I did that. That landed me at Penn. I was at Penn for my grad work. My first year while I was at Penn, there was a hostile takeover attempt of the Sierra Club board by anti-immigration activists.
Wow.
Yeah, that was weird. That was the front page of the New York Times when that was going on. So then Sierra Club leaders put together a slate of candidates to prevent the takeover attempt, and I became a member of that slate of candidates. So that meant that I was running for the Sierra Club board while also learning political science. Then I got elected to the board. The other 5 years I was in grad school, I was also living sort of this double life as a national nonprofit leader. And this is in the aughts, which is just around when the internet starts being interesting for political organizations, right? Like in 1999, when I was heading Sierra Student Coalition, I remember somebody came to us and they had like a product to pitch, and they were like, it's this great product that if you have a petition, we'll turn that petition into an email to the legislator. This is going to change everything. And we were like, but we can just hand them the petition. Like, we already do that. This doesn't seem very good. And in 1999, like that wasn't very useful then. By 2002, 2004, like Howard Dean is using the internet to raise millions online. He's like developing a real movement around him. And so that's around the time when the internet's getting interesting for organizations like Sierra Club. So that the way it ended up coming to pass was I was in grad school thinking about what the internet means for politics, and I was in the Sierra Club thinking about what the internet means for politics, and those are two very different ways to approach that problem. Like they think about it in different ways. That it's just like it's a different way of operating, and that became the dissertation project, was trying to merge those two perspectives to sort of figure out what does the internet mean for political organizations. So that became the research. That became my first job was at Rutgers for 2 years, 2010 to 2012, during which I wrote The Move On Effect, which was my first book, which came out of the dissertation. So that sort of is where the research agenda came out of, was doing the work of political organizing on the internet while also thinking as a political scientist about what does this mean and what is political science missing.
Wow. What that also means is my first 2 years of an undergrad coincided with your last 2 years as a PhD student at Penn. Oh, I wish we knew each other back then.
I could have taught you, man.
Yeah, that would be so cool. Wow. Okay, so you knew some of the professors that I had. Wow. Okay.
Who were your favorite professors? Do you remember?
Let's see. I did really enjoy Lipinski's class, Jonathan Lipinski.
So John Lipinski was on my dissertation committee.
Mhm.
He is the guy, when I'm talking to political science grad students, I always tell a Lipinski story, because I handed him a draft of chapter 2 of the dissertation, which was 100 pages long, which for any listeners, that is too long of a chapter draft. Like that's way too long. And there were good ideas in that, but like it was massively undercooked. So he reads it, and his feedback to me, he says, like, the short version was, "This is really good. This is really interesting. You know, you're never getting hired to a political science department, right?" And I was like, I didn't know that. Do you think I'll get hired somewhere? And Lipinski, in kind of classic, he's a great guy, but like it's sort of classic Lipinski style, he was like, "Yeah, probably." And sure enough, my first job was at a comm department. I'm in a political communication department now. I've never been hired to a political science department. He was right about that. But like that's my big Lipinski memory, is him reading that devilishly long chapter, and the main point of feedback was, you know, you're never getting hired to a political science department. It's just sort of like calling out what it was, which is like, you're doing really interesting but weird work, man. You're not going to fit in normal places, which turned out to be true.
And what I appreciate about what you did with your dissertations, you started thinking interdisciplinary before that was like the general cool thing in society, right? You were interdisciplinary before it was cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a little bit. I mean, I think in particular, I was like my thesis advisor was dissertation advisor, this guy named Roger Smith, who's retired now, but wonderful scholar. He was president of the American Political Science Association for a while. He's the reason I came to Penn, was to study with him. And something that Rogers taught us was you should always be question driven in your research, right? So what is the puzzle that you're trying to solve? And then you figure out methods that are going to help you gain leverage on that puzzle. But there's a real habit in political science and in a lot of disciplines of starting with the methods you want to use, and then sort of following the logic of the hammer of saying like, well, I really want to run regression analysis, so what can I do that with? Or my first few years as a professor, machine learning then was not what it is now, but there were I would be discussing on a lot of papers that were essentially, there's natural language processing. You can use that to analyze large corpuses of data, and we would like to do that. And so we're going to study internet politics because that has a large corpus of data, and we really want to do natural language processing. And like technically, those were really interesting papers. Substantively, you could kind of tell like, oh, you actually don't care. Like, you don't really have a question. Your question is like, wouldn't it be cool to use this method? And you are. And it's a pretty cool method, but like, man, this is kind of a boring paper because you yourselves know like the only reason you're doing this is because you want to use that method. So Rogers really encouraged us to think about, what's the question you want to answer? What's the puzzle you want to solve? And then just go answer it. I remember early on, I was kind of trying to shape the project. And there was a bunch of work on the political blogosphere, because again, it's the aughts. And I was trying to sort of fit it into this big conceptual framework that was just not working at all. And Rogers said to me, well, it seems like you want to study political bloggers, so why don't you go study them? Mm-hmm. And it was kind of this, social permission to say, there's a thing that you find interesting that we don't understand, go figure it out. And that ends up being interdisciplinary, because if you're not fitting into a disciplinary home, if you're following the question, well, there's sociologists and comm scholars and computer scientists who are also finding the political blogosphere interesting. So you end up fitting in with them and in conversation with them because you're all chasing that same substantively interesting puzzle.
And as a PhD student, you had to teach, was it one class, two classes? How many classes did you teach or TA?
I TA'd, I think it was one class per semester for 2 years was the deal back then.
Okay, I see. I see. And was there a lot of philosophy that you had to take too, or was that not really the case? Okay.
Penn had a separate program called Philosophy and Political Economy, I think, PPE.
Yeah, PP. That was my major undergrad. So
yeah. We had some of those students would take classes that I was TAing, but political science is traditionally divided into 4 main subject areas. There's American politics, comparative politics, international relations, and political theory.
Mhm.
And you go and you specialize in one. So I was American politics, and then you need to learn enough of a second to take field exams. I ended up doing field exams in international relations, even though otherwise I didn't know anything about it. So I don't think I took any political theory while I was there. I was a philosophy minor in undergrad, but yeah, that was 3 or 4 classes that I took. That was about it.
I see. So you're teaching at Rutgers, and then what happens next after Rutgers?
So Rutgers was great. It was a tenure track job. I joked back then, and it's still empirically the case, that if as a professor you get a first job, tenure track job, that lets you live in Brooklyn, you're not allowed to complain about anything. Like, it was great. I went from being like meagerly paid grad student. I had a postdoc at Brown and a pre-doc at UVA. So a couple more years of sort of not knowing whether this career was going to work. And then land a great job at a great department that allowed me to live in Brooklyn. Wow. And the one downside of that is if you live in Brooklyn and you teach at Rutgers, that's like a 2-hour train commute each way. So I kind of knew going in, like, this is a fantastic job, a fantastic department, and I am probably not going to have a 40-year career of 2-hour train commutes. I'm either eventually going to move to New Jersey or take a different job. So I was there for a couple of years. I had interviewed at GW that same year, and they gave the job to somebody else, a good friend of mine now. And somebody was retiring there who teaches strategic political communication, which is kind of my field. And so he saw me at a conference, and he was like, "Hey, just so you know, I'm retiring. They're hiring for the job. People really liked you last time. You should think about it." So when that job came open, particularly having been from the DC area, I applied for it. It was a perfect fit. I just started dating a lovely woman who's a lawyer who her firm had an office in DC, so she moved there with me. We're now married. So it was kind of a perfect personal life thing. For listeners who are considering a PhD, one of the real downsides of a PhD is that it's 5 or 6 years, and then you're entering a job lottery to see whether or not you land one of those few rare tenure track jobs. And you got to work hard, but working hard is just buying more lottery tickets. Like, you still got to get lucky. My first year on the job market, I completely struck out and got offered a postdoc after I'd given up all hope. The second year, I struck out on almost every job, and then the last one I applied for, Rutgers, worked out. And then after that, it's been an incredible life and smooth sailing. But it really was luck that landed me in that job. And it could have easily gone a different way.
Let's talk about the books you've written. You've written 2 already, right? And you're writing your 3rd one?
I've written 2. The 3rd is written, and it comes out in January.
Oh, okay. All right. So let's talk about the first book. What got you to write the first book? What were some of the interesting moments in writing your first book?
So the first book was called The Move On Effect, The Unexpected Transformation of American Political Advocacy. That was based on the dissertation. So, the dissertation ended up being a first draft of that book. And that was really, like, the underlying puzzle was there's this new generation of political groups. They're not so new anymore, but MoveOn.org was the iconic one that had redefined membership in an organization. So, like, back when I was giving talks about the Move On Effect, my favorite bit, that was really the thing that people took away from it, is I would, this is 2008, 2009. So imagine, like, Obama has just been elected. Obama's campaign and Move On are sort of the definitive political, like, internet politics groups. And I would say to an audience of academics, like, how many of you receive emails from Move On? And many of the hands in the audience would go up. And I'd say, now how many of you are Move On members? And pretty much all the hands would go down. And then I would say to them, so congratulations, you are all Move On members. The funny thing is, if any of them read back in 2009 any of the emails that Move On sent them, the first line in every email was "Dear Move On member." But what was going on there is, like, organizational membership in the 1950s, 1960s meant showing up, like with the Rotary Club or the Elks Club. You would show up to meetings, you would pay dues. That made you a member of an organization. Starting in the 1970s, we get a redefinition of membership where everybody who writes a check to the organization gets stuff in the mail from them, and they're all considered members. So that's a redefinition of membership that leads to different fundraising, leads to different organizational forms. That's well covered in the political science literature of sort of the interest group explosion in the 1970s. And what the Move On effect was really about was groups like Move On have redefined membership again, where they're saying, if you are on our email list, we're going to consider you a member, right? So that organization started as an e-petition to censure Bill Clinton over the Lewinsky scandal and Move On. And it was one of the early viral petitions, like 500,000 people signed that petition online. Congress ignores it, they censure him anyway. But the two people who started it, who were tech entrepreneurs. They had just sold a company called Berkeley Systems, which, if you remember the flying toaster screensaver, or the game You Don't Know Jack, both of those were from Berkeley Systems. Mm-hmm. So the co-founders were the couple who had sold that company. They write this petition, it goes viral, and then afterwards they're like, well, we have the email address of 500,000 people who all agree with us. Congress didn't listen, so we're going to email them and say, like, okay, Congress didn't listen. Here's what we think we should do next. And then you have a political organization. But that turn of saying, if we have your email address, we can interact with you, and that means that you're kind of like a member. And that means that if we want to do a full page ad in the New York Times, we can email everybody on our list and say, here's our idea for a full page ad in the New York Times. Do you want to chip in $5? And it turns out the members will do that. So membership then becomes not you gave us an annual donation and we're going to send you stuff in the mail, but you signed up for our list so we can email you and give you opportunities for action. That again leads to different organizational forms, different tactics, different strategies. So the book ends up being about that, about the organizational layer of American politics and how the internet is leading to changes amidst it. That book comes out 2012. I think it was right around the time that the book came out. I was doing field research at a conference called Netroots Nation, which is one of the big left political conferences at the time, and particularly for digital politics, like the one. And I remember one of the organizations that's in the Move On effect is an organization called Progressive Change Campaign Committee. I'd interviewed the founders and become friends with them over the course of the research. So I'm at Netroots Nation and I'm waiting to go to lunch with one of the co-founders of it, a woman named Stephanie Taylor. And she is deep in discussion with the leader of another organization about a political ad that they're planning to put on the air in the state of Wisconsin. And they have different visions for what should this ad be? What story should it tell? Who should be the hero? Who should be the villain? Like, what are we doing with this? And each of them sort of presents their argument. And again, having grown up in movement politics, like one of my formative experiences when I was in high school was, this is a tangent, but try to follow me here. All listeners, please follow me on this. So imagine me back in high school in the 1990s. I'm in a church basement in August, and the Coalition to Stop the Intercounty Connector, which is a big campaign that we were working on back then, is arguing back and forth about should our main tactic be a petition or postcards? And this had gone on for like 2 months, like layers and layers of committee meetings, arguing over which tactic is going to be more effective. And the real answer is nobody knows, and it probably doesn't matter, but like there are strong opinions about this because as movement participants who the odds are stacked against us, like this is a thing we control, so we really want to get it right. And so I had been to, I think, 4 or 5 meetings, like young high school me had been to like 4 or 5 meetings where they debated it, and the people who believe in petitions explained why they're way more effective. People who believe in postcards explained why they're way more effective. And then they would table it and say like, well, we'll talk about it more next time. And it's like the week before high school is about to start, my senior year. And the coalition is still having that conversation. And they're about to say, I guess we'll table it for next time. And young high school Dave raises his hand and says, well, school starts on Monday and we need something to circulate to our leaders, and we have this petition here. So our group is going to use the petition. We'll gather signatures on that. And then everybody in the coalition were like, great, we'll do that. We'll just go with it. And like afterwards, my mentor and all my like activist buddy, like student activist buddies were like, man, like you're such a leader. Like that's so cool how you resolved this problem. And all that young me could think was like, there has to be better ways to make these decisions. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm 17 years old. Why is everybody listening to me? I don't know. There's got to be a better way to make these decisions. So fast forward to 2013, the first book is done. I'm waiting to go to lunch with my friend Stephanie, and I hear her break into that same pattern of activists debating with other activists. They have different visions. Nobody knows what's right. Usually what happens is you argue until somebody gets tired and then the other side wins, or you agree to discuss it later. And so I can see her into that pattern, and I'm hungry, and I'm like, this is going to last forever. And then Stephanie said to her colleague, well, we'll test it. And the colleague said, yeah, we'll test it. And then we went to lunch. But as we were going to lunch, I think to myself, oh my God, I need to write another book. Because what that was showing me was that data testing digital listening was having a real impact on how these organizations develop tactics, try them out, develop new strategies. Like the ability not just to speak online, but for organizations to track what is working and then adjust and amend to that. That was something that I had kind of hinted at in the first book, but like, God damn it, I needed to write a sequel because there was a lot more there I hadn't gotten into yet. So the second book was called Analytic Activism, How Digital Listening in the New Political Strategy. And it is my attempt to go deeper into those organizations and pay attention to how they develop tactics, how they measure them, what that leads to, both positive and negative. That was, I think, a better book than The Move On Effect. I was really proud of it. It came out in December 2016. And the way publishing works is if your book comes out in December, it was fully done like February or March. So that means that when I had finished writing the book, nobody thought Donald Trump was going to win a primary. And when the book came out, Donald Trump was president. And I'd sort of written a book that I think was a really good discussion of the political advocacy world as it was. And it was a book that didn't imagine the way that political advocacy, particularly left-wing political advocacy in the United States, was about to get changed. So like, I still think it's a good, like, I'm so proud of the book. It's a good book. It came out 10 years ago, but it was a book with terrible timing. And when I was doing a book tour for the following 6 months, it's like, I was talking about the book, but then I kept really wanting to talk about how everything in the book is a little outdated all of a sudden. Because what we really need to think about is how this new political opponent changes what organizations are going to do, and what tactics work, what strategies work. Like everything is kind of getting rethought. And so I did that. And then after that, I kind of wanted a little break from studying political organizations, particularly because the problem with studying organizations and what they're doing today is like you can write a book that ends up being outdated, and sort of like you always have to, like, it is your job to pay attention to what's happening in politics today, and you get no breaks. And politics changes fast, particularly with the internet. So I hatched a plan to do sort of a goofy little side project where I thought it would be like, I'd always thought it'd be fun to read the entire back catalog of Wired magazine and just trace the imagined digital futures that did and didn't arrive, and sort of say like, let's look at what the internet revolution looked like as it was arriving and see what we can learn from that. And the nice thing is like a well-contained project about history, and history doesn't change. So I started doing that in summer of 2018. I actually got invited to write about it for Wired magazine was founded in '93. So I was talking to an editor from Wired and mentioned that I had this idea, and he was like, we've got our 25th anniversary issue coming up. Do you want to do that and then write about it for us? And it was like, yeah, that'd be great. So I did that. I wrote it for them. It came out in October 2018. And as I was doing that, I was like, there's a lot here. I need to write this book. And so then that became the new book project, which took a total of like 8 or 9 years to read the entire back catalog twice, and then sort of really figure out what my arguments were and what the best way was to offer them. And of course, in the midst of that, even though it's a book about history, like the techno-optimism of the 1990s sounds very similar to the techno-optimism of today. So it ends up being a book about why when Mark Andreessen and Elon Musk talk about how technology will save the world if we just trust them and their companies, they're treating that as though it is something new, but that's actually something that they and people like them have been saying for 30 years. It has a track record and we should take that seriously. So it ended up being a very contemporaneous book, like a book about this moment, but based in history. So like in the process of writing it, I had to keep on sort of responding to the moment of today. So it became a less well-contained project, but also one I'm really proud of. So that's coming out in January with Norton. It's called Vaporware Incorporated, How Silicon Valley Sells the Future to Control the Present.
Wow. There's a lot to unpack with this, but one of the things immediately that comes to mind is just there's a lot of pivoting going on, right? That's like the definition of being in this field. There's a lot of, because let's think about communications, whether just political communications in general, the field of communications, you have to not just stick with the times, but every field you're pulling from, that field's also evolving. So like when you're doing anything interdisciplinary, it has to evolve. Just because the field you're pulling from, at least one of them's evolving. So
yeah.
Wow. And then the other thing that really came to mind is that concept. Okay, if you sign up for a newsletter, you're kind of a member. And I had an experience like that recently. So those of you who follow me, not on this channel, but some of my other channels, know that YouTube, for example, has quote unquote channel memberships, right? And channel memberships are a different model. It's like you have to pay to play. So like a viewer has to pay $1 or pay $2, and then they're considered a member. So that's the paradigm I've always been. But recently I subscribed to the newsletter by All Tech is Human, you know, one of these like thinking about futurism, thinking about AI policy type of groups. And just by subscribing to the newsletter, they also called me a member. I was like, whoa. I was like, but so you explain, Move On did that first. So they didn't invent anything new. That's always been a playbook.
Yeah. Yeah. And the definition of membership is fluid and wrapped up in communications technologies, right? So in the 1950s, they would not call you a member just because they can send you a piece of mail. And if they did that, it would be kind of weird. And also there would be no point. Like what you'd be doing then is diluting the experience of membership of the people who show up to things and pay dues. So that like you, and I guess you could do it, but you wouldn't do that and it wouldn't make any sense. And today, if you only called, like I'm back on the board of the Sierra Club now. I got reelected in 2024. So I've been serving on their board again. And this question of which of the stakeholder groups that do things with us do we call members? Now a very different conversation, because again, like, you know, there are several million people who receive communications from the Sierra Club. Those communications ask them and engage them in the fight to protect the planet. All of them we have a relationship with that is kind of member-like. And then also we have people who show up to local group meetings and, you know, state chapter meetings and take on leadership in the Sierra Club and do a lot more stuff. So those layers of like, okay, well, what name do we give to each of these things in order to position ourselves so that we can do really good work, right? Because at the end of the day, the question for any organization, any advocacy group is, well, what's the change you want to see in the world? And how can you build yourself, like develop the resources and the capacities so that you can actually do it? So like amidst that, the sort of what counts as membership is fluid and always changing, again, with communications technologies and with sort of the strategic goals that you're facing.
Yeah. Another word that I talk to some of my YouTuber friends about is follower, right? Because for example, on Instagram, you have a follower, but the beauty of Instagram is if one of your followers, let's say, leave something bad in the comment section or something, you have the opportunity to remove that follower. And if you talk to Generation 1 YouTuber, which I would consider myself Generation 3, but if you talk to Generation 1 and Generation 2 YouTubers, their biggest complaint about YouTube is that you can't remove your subscribers. If a subscriber subscribed to you and never watches your stuff, YouTube kind of punishes you. So why can't a YouTuber remove their subscribers, right? So like all these terms don't always have the same definitions, and then they come with different criteria. And so like you talking to you has awoken something that like I think about all the time. And it's so interesting that there are parallels in political advocacy and political communication.
Like one of my favorite cases to teach in the classroom. Do you remember Coney 2012?
Yes.
Yeah. So Coney 2012 is this massive political mobilization in 2012. Starts with sort of the first viral political video, a 30-minute advocacy video about child soldiers in Africa, abducted by Joseph Kony. The tagline of that is, "We're going to make him famous." One of the things I always point out in class is like, that's their tagline. That's not their goal, right? Like they're not Joseph Kony's publicist. They want to bring him to justice. And I do a classroom exercise where we like talk through sort of like, okay, like what's the real strategic goal? And how do these advocacy tactics fit together? But the bit that always surfaces for me when I teach that case, just occurred to me, this is also in the analytic activism book, is since that video went viral on YouTube, Google and YouTube know who all of the millions of people are who watched the video. Invisible Children, the group that produced the video that shut down and no longer exists, does not have that list. So one of the things that, like when I'm thinking about membership in the digital age, one of the most critical things is who controls access to this person, right? Like, do I own my own list? I used to write on Substack, and I built up a newsletter with over 10,000 readers on Substack. And then I decided I wanted to leave for Biihive because I got real annoyed with Substack about too many things. The last straw for me was when they announced this partnership with Polymarket, because Polymarket is straight gambling. It is bad for society. I'm not opposed to gambling at all, but there ought to be a lot of frictions to make it harder for people to lose their money. And I do not like what's going on there. And I'd actually just like a week beforehand written an essay about how this is going to go badly. And then Substack was like, great news, you can add widgets to Poly. And I was like, I'm out of here. But one really nice thing was when I left Substack, I was able to take my email list with me. If I had built that followership on Instagram instead, and I wanted to leave Instagram for somewhere else, you don't get to take those people with you because Instagram controls that relationship. Throughout the 2010s, like in the early 2010s, all these political advocacy groups were building up their followership on Facebook in particular, because that was back when Facebook was still relatively cool and was the main gateway to political information. Like there was like a little window in there where like, you know, this is sort of the BuzzFeed era, where like the way to make something go viral at all was to figure out what is the Facebook algorithm going to like. And so organizations would build these large followings through Facebook. And then Facebook would change the rules and say, oh, by the way, if you would like to reach them, you're going to have to pay us now. And, you know, it was like such a sucker's bet. It happened time and time again. And Facebook was like, you need to devote resources to building up a following on Facebook. The future is on Facebook. And then Facebook would turn around and say like, oh, by the way, we're not going to charge you for that future. And since Facebook controlled the people, can control the lists, you were just kind of stuck. So that still comes to mind for me now. Like one of the reasons why I think I like newsletters, and I think a lot of people do, is that tangible element of like, if I decide to go somewhere else, I can take my email list with me, and my readers aren't really going to care that they're getting an email from Dave Karpf, like davekarpf.biihive.com instead of davekarpf.substack.com. Like that is a smooth transition. That capacity is relatively new, and it fits in with this question of like, well, what are we going to call a member? And do we control that relationship or does somebody else?
Yeah. And I think the controlling the relationship part is something that I'm really, really inspired to think more talking to you, because there's something that a lot of us that built a following on one of these platforms or a few of these platforms that you couldn't really control the full relationship with your follower, your member, whatever you call it. A lot of us push to the back of our minds.
Yeah.
But when we talk to someone like you, we're like, man, that should have been the first thing going back in time someone taught us. It's like, you better get a contact information. You better get something. So when you're, because we were idealistic, I'm still idealistic, you know, but like you have to realize the reality. If you're one day moving on, you have to be able to be like, hey, come with me, come with me.
The platform that I used to be biggest on was Twitter. I had a thing back in 2019, which a few of your listeners might know of, if anybody remembers the time that the New York Times columnist Bret Stephens got into a fight online, that fight was with me. So the short version of the story is, this was back in August 2019. There was a headline going around that there were bed bugs in the New York Times newsroom. And so everybody was doing the thing where they like they quote retweet it and then they make a joke about that headline. And my joke was, the bed bugs are a metaphor, the bed bugs are Bret Stephens. 0 people retweeted the joke. 9 people liked the joke. It was apparently not my best work. That night, and I also hadn't used his Twitter handle because that would be rude. That night, he name searched himself, I guess, found that, and emailed me and my university provost complaining that I had set a new low for decency on the internet and inviting me to his home so I could meet his wife and kids and call him a bedbug to his face, which was a bit of an overreaction. And since he had CC'd my provost, also very clearly him trying to get me in trouble with my employer. So I then shared that he had done that with Twitter, and then shared a screenshot of the email, and the entire internet then spent the next week making fun of him. If you go to his Wikipedia page, it still has the Bret bug incident listed. So like I got kind of internet famous for a week because of that back and forth. And the real output of it was I started that with like a little under 10,000 Twitter followers. At the end of it, I had like 40,000 Twitter followers, and people like knew me for years and years as the Bret bug guy. Fast forward, Elon Musk takes over Twitter. And there was actually at one point a reporter named Nancy Scola, this is in like the first year of the takeover, was interviewing people who are big on Twitter who hated it now. And I got a quote from me became the title of the article, which was something like, "I'm going to be the last person to leave Twitter because I fell into a gold mine." Like I kind of felt trapped in Twitter because I had a larger audience there than anyone else. I wasn't going to pay for Elon's blue check, so I wasn't reaching as many people, but I was like, look, if I move over to Bluesky or something, like I'm going to start from scratch because people aren't going to come with me. And eventually I'll have a book to sell. I probably am stuck with this audience. About 6 months later, I then kind of ran the numbers and realized, even though I had a large follower count, I was getting maybe 2,000 views at all on my tweets. And that was because since I wasn't paying for the blue check, I wasn't getting boosted. And also a lot of my followers they still had an account, but they weren't using it anymore because it had turned to shit. So at that point I decided, I'm out of here. I'm just going to rebuild on Bluesky. I'm now much bigger on Bluesky than I was in my Twitter days. That's nice. But I did have to start from scratch because there was like a tool you could use when you migrate to see which of the people you follow and who follow you on Twitter are on Bluesky. So that populated with like maybe 1,000 or 2, but everything else was just like, oh, I built that following, but that locked me into Twitter. There's no way to move off of it and take your people with you. So I guess I have to start from scratch, and like it ended up working out. But that was a leap, and if it could have gone a different way.
Yeah, and there's something very important about this topic too, because on one hand, yes, the following you built is good, but I think what you realize and what I sort of sometimes realize occasionally, depending on the year, in the past 10 years, is you also don't be too attached to the following, because I don't know if this is something you had to deal with, but because one of my first viral videos happened in 2016, right? It was 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. So a lot of my followers have kids now. I don't blame them for not caring about me, like they got kids now. So it's like, oh, so like you can't just think this way. You have to think this way about your followers too. Like, are you reaching the Gen Alpha? Are you reaching the Gen Z? Which I am having a lot of trouble reaching Gen Z and a lot of trouble reaching Gen Alpha. But like, you got to think this way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that way. Also, again, wearing my strategic political communication hat, you also just got to think about sort of like what, like besides reaching large numbers, like what do I actually want to do here, right? Like in the next year, I want to reach people who would want to read a book like Vaporware Incorporated. The General Alpha people who would want to read a book like that, I want to reach them. But like, there's also just a lot of people who agree with me on politics, but I'm not going to be their cup of tea, right? Like I am a 47-year-old political communication professor who makes a lot of dad jokes. Like my students often wince at my jokes. My kids always wince at my jokes. Like it's entirely possible that my brand is going to be one that doesn't really reach the younger generation, and that's okay, right? Like if the audience that I'm really going to reach is a bunch of people in their 30s and 40s who also appreciate dad jokes and my old like elderly cultural references, like that's who I want to speak to, and that's okay. It doesn't need to be the maximum audience, right? Somebody else can reach those audiences.
Yeah. And again, I'm going to emphasize that word you said, branding. This is something I think I was much better about 10 years ago. And then I got complacent. 10 years ago, I was at ByteDance at the time, but I was building my YouTube channels. And I was telling people, I'm like, branding's the most important thing you have to care about in this modern digital age. I used to say that, and you could play a drinking game out of it. And then I got complacent. But I have to emphasize what Professor Karpf said, like, branding. Everyone needs to think about their branding. Now, obviously, anything can be taken to the extreme. I'm not telling you to, like, every picture you take, you have to have the perfect lighting. You have to, I'm not saying that, but you got to know how you come off, how you want to come off. If there's a difference between the two, do you want to change it, etc. So you have to think about this stuff and then be like, okay, if I want to reach something or if I want to make change, how's the best way, knowing these things, to make that change?
I think that's right. The one bit that I want to nudge at, this is me sort of being a cranky old dude. Branding is important. I think it is secondary to knowing your actual goals.
Yes.
Right? Like, you're going to do your best work and seem most authentic if and when you know what you're trying to achieve and you feel like you have something to say. And once you know what you want to achieve and you have something to say, then you want to figure out, how do I say it? What are the right forums for me? And how do I present myself there, right? Like, then you start worrying about what is my brand. But I do think branding is secondary, because otherwise you can get really polished, you can get really large audiences, while also not having thought enough about, like, what am I even doing here? And then you're sort of destining yourself for a midlife crisis.
Yeah. A burnout, right? Which is, you could argue, I dealt with one of those for the past few years. So I'm being honest, right? Because I just sort of went through, like, few of my channels got really big, and then one of my channels I really got passionate about. But then it's like, I didn't think about, okay, like, is this 10 years later something like I really want to do? Is this something like, can I add voice to this in 20 years, right? Like, you got to think about that. So yes, I 100% agree with Professor Karpf. And this is why Professor Karpf is a professor, right? I'm learning from you.
Thanks.
So let's talk about your day in the day. How many classes do you teach now? How do you teach? I assume you do tell some dad jokes and stuff, but what else? Like, what else about your teaching? What else about your day in day?
I only teach 2 classes every semester. It depends on the semester. Some of those are, like, this coming semester, I'll be teaching strategic political communication on Mondays. On Wednesdays, I'm going to teach a class called Senior Seminar for our seniors. So it's senior thesis class. I will tell you and your listeners, we're now living in the age of professors freaking out about, how do I generative AI proof my classes? The first class is relatively generative AI proof. That second class is not generative AI proof. The end result of it is a big paper that is hard to write, that generative AI makes easy to write. So I'm going to spend some of the summer sort of figuring out, how do I make sure this is still a real learning experience, given how technology is changing. And I'm annoyed that I'm going to have to spend some of the summer that way. But besides that, and again, I've been teaching in School of Media and Public Affairs for, this will be my 14th year. My God. And it's a small set of classes that I always teach. So those classes change over time, right? If somebody who took my class in 2014 came back and audited the class now, like a good third of it, they would be like, man, you're still doing Coney 2012. I remember that. But that's because that set piece is great. Like, the pieces that they would be like, I remember doing that, are, I think, good pieces. And then there are a bunch of pieces where they'd be like, this is different now, and I can see why. So the classes do change. But beyond that, it's, I teach 2 classes a semester. I advise my students. I have a subset of students who are my advisees. So, like, they'll come in and I'll give them advice, and then life advice to whoever else shows up. And beyond that, again, I'm kind of a public intellectual. So I write at least 1 blog post per week for the newsletter. That's on a mix of technology and politics. The blog is called The Future Now and Then, because it's about the digital future then, it's about the digital future now, it's about politics now, and it's about politics back then. So I've been writing that for 5 years, so I'm always writing that. And then launching new research projects is also sort of part of the job. So I, write the blog or write the books. I figure out what the next book is going to be, and then I start working on that.
And so the next book comes out in January. Do you have a potential topic for the fourth book?
There are a couple different projects that might become the fourth book. And the real answer is there's a fourth, fifth, and maybe sixth book that are like kicking around there. And the question of like, which one is going first? That's one of the things I'm going to be working out this summer. A ritual of mine. So back in 2022, I reread The Move On Effect because it was 10 years later. And I wrote a blog post series called The Move On Effect 10 years later, sort of trying to tease out what are the things that I missed or what are the things that I didn't see coming. It's not like some things I got wrong. And some things it's just like, well, in the intervening 10 years, the world zigged where I thought it would zag. So I wanted to lean into that and sort of, reflect 10 years later, what comes up for me when I reread this book. So this coming month, I'm going to reread Analytic Activism because it's 10 years later. And I'm going to do the same thing. That's certainly going to be a blog post series, but kind of toying with the idea of doing a book that, my working title in my head is After Analytic Activism. But we'll be returning to those themes and sort of saying like, okay, now we've had 10 years of Trumpism. And also we're living amidst generative AI. Right? Like I had a full chapter in that book about digital petition platforms. Those still exist. They're less important under Trump. And also they're less important now because generative AI can fake that so easily. So your political targets don't take it seriously anymore because they assume it could be fake. So I've been sort of thinking in my head about like, well, what does that mean for the stuff I used to study? And it's possible I'll write a blog post series and I'll say, okay, that's all I had to say. It's entirely possible that I'll write that and realize, wait, I've got 7 chapters of a book that I now feel like I need to write right away. So that could happen. I've got a project with a co-author on the history of the environmental movement, looking at the strategic political communication choices, mostly that were made in the 1980s, and what that meant for the capacities of the movement moving forward. So that's a slow-moving project we've had for a few years. That's eventually going to be a book. I don't know when it'll be a book. Could end up being I might end up writing a sequel to Vaporware Incorporated after it comes out, depending if like with Analytic Activism, if I have like a bunch of new ideas when I'm on the road talking about the book, and as the internet keeps changing, then I might decide, oh wait, I got more to say. So we'll see.
Yeah. So much of that is interesting, but I definitely am very interested in especially environmental activism, especially because, you've been involved with the Sierra Club and everything. And obviously, I think environmental policy in general, environmental advocacy has been changing so much. Just there's misinformation, but then there's just a lot of stuff going on in that field. So I think it would be cool to see a book on, okay, like what is going on? Or how do environmentalists reach people? How do people who care about other factors reach people or fight back against environment? Like that is actually a really interesting topic. I think I'm actually taking a course this fall about like energy, water, and probably a little bit of environmental policy. So like this is something I'm definitely very interested in. So I'm very curious about that field too.
Great. Nice. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Are there any other topics you want to talk about while we have you?
Look, the things that I usually like to talk about these days are Elon Musk being a trillionaire is ridiculous. Finance ate Silicon Valley. And the result is that all of tech ends up being just speculative finance in ways that I think are bad and clearly a bubble. So I'm cranky about that. I'm, a mile or so from the Great American State Fair, which should have been a wonderful celebration of the 250th anniversary of the United States, and instead is sort of this like weird, embarrassing, goofy ode to Trump, because Trump makes everything more coarse, and I hate it. So like I could say a bit about that, but yeah, it's just me being a cranky old guy.
I guess a question I thought about is, obviously there's a great program at GW that you run.
Mm-hmm.
What advice do you give students, whether in the program to succeed the best at the program or for prospective students who want to apply to the program? What do you look for?
I mean, the main thing I look for, this is similar to the point about branding. Main thing I look for is, do you have a sense of what you're going to grad school for and what you want to get out of it? The people who get the most out of my grad program are the ones who come in with a clear sense of what am I trying to achieve? Because You can take a bunch of classes from me and other professors, and you will learn some stuff, and it'll give you some good ideas. You will leave with a set of skills and a set of relationships. That'll be good. If you want to get to great, you want to be able to walk in there saying, learning all this stuff, here's the thing I want to know the most about, or here's the thing that this is challenging or helping me to develop, because I already have a clear sense of where I want to go. So that's the thing that I look for in applications, and that I encourage from my advisees. Is it's not like you need to start grad school with clear ideas. Like, God knows but the more clarity you can have, like I see often over the years, people who go to grad school just because they don't know what they want to do next. Again, that was kind of me when I was 23 or 24. And if we could go back in time and you could interview me at age 24 or 25, what you would find out is like, man, that guy is miserable and is not getting as much out of grad school as he probably should or would if he had a clue what he's doing next. So even though it turned out great, like younger me is autobiographically kind of a cautionary tale. Like, don't do what I did, even though it worked out. Like, you're going to get more out of graduate school, particularly a master's program, if you're entering it not because you're not sure what you want to do next, but because you have a pretty clear sense, and this is going to help you achieve your goals. So the more you can sharpen that, I think the more you're going to get out of any grad program.
Yeah, Professor Karpf and I bonded because we spent part of our 20s in Philly. And so we both bonded. Yeah, Philly was a good city, but not in the state of mind we were in, right? So we both bonded in that. So,
I'm still mad at that city for what it did.
Yeah,
what it did was be home to me at age 27. I was a mess.
Yeah, I totally feel it. And it's so funny because it goes back to the goals, the branding, and sort of all this stuff we talked about. It will make your surroundings not as enjoyable. People are like, oh, this is such a great place. And the people are like, I don't feel it's like, you got to think about some of these things, these deep things that Professor has talked about. Because in my 20s, there's the same thing. Like Philly, it just reminded me of a city I was in when I was lost. And I got a lot out of it. And I started building YouTube channels around there, but like I was pretty lost. And thank goodness I took time right before I went to grad school. But it's like, imagine if I were also in grad school. Ooh, yeah, I know you're feeling now.
Now, I do want to give one defense of being lost. That like, there's a 23-year-old listening to this, and right now they're saying like, oh God, I'm kind of lost right now. That means I'm screwing up. Like, no, you're at 23, you probably should be a little lost, right? Like the work of figuring out what do I actually want to do and who do I actually want to be, that is real work, and that takes time. Yeah. So like if you're kind of lost right now, like that's okay. Give yourself a break. You haven't done something wrong, but recognize that the work right now is getting unlost, figuring out what do I want to do, who do I want to be, because the work of figuring that out is really productive so long as you're doing the work. Like I occasionally will have like an undergrad who is absolutely sure they have mapped out what the next 10 to 15 years of their life is going to be. And usually what I think to myself is like, this person is in for such a rude awakening. Like they have got it all figured out and they're almost definitely wrong. Like maybe once in a while they actually called it, but like usually they have charted their entire path. And what they don't realize is like along the way, I'm going to realize that this path was not for me, but it's going to be a hard realization because I'm not giving myself room to be lost for a bit. So there's nothing wrong with being lost. Just, like when I was 26, I was lost and not putting in the work to figure that out yet. So it took longer than it should have. So like, if you're lost, that's fine. Just do the work to figure it out. That's your job.
The story I have from undergrad, I had a classmate who you could tell he's one of those guys. Like he thought, he was so intense, super intense. And one day he saw me. I wasn't even pledging. I was rushing a frat, and he just happened to like stumble on me. And I didn't end up pledging a frat. He ended up pledging that frat. And it like changed his life trajectory completely. He's like, Jerry, if I didn't stumble on you that random night, I wouldn't have discovered Greek life. I wouldn't have. And I'm like, yeah, I didn't even go into Greek life. So that's the story I always tell people. Like, we're not saying like, like embrace change, embrace the learning you do along the way, right? We're 100% of that, but always be active in that. So seek out mentors, like reach out to Professor Karpf, talk to him, like reach out to people, talk to people your age. You can learn a lot from young people too. Talk to people younger than you, like be active. Don't just sit around and don't just mope, which I did some in my 20s. So, yeah, exactly. So, I will link your Biihive and I'll link your Bluesky. Are your books on Amazon?
Yep, yeah, including the new ones available for pre-order.
Okay, so I'll start a little Amazon list. I'll put your books on there. So if people want to check them out, they can check them out. And yeah, Professor Karpf, I would love to have you back in the future. I'm sure we will have a lot to talk about, especially this world's just evolving so fast, so crazy. So a lot to unpack in the future.
Sounds great. Love to.
Yeah. And maybe what we can do is when your book comes out after January or something, we'll do another talk.
Cool. Sounds great.
Yeah. So
All right.
everyone, this was Professor Dave Karpf.
Bye, y'all.